So, the militia, it's our big thing here, has become our big thing here. We hope it to become an even bigger thing. Uh, and we look at the comments a lot. Obviously, I look at all the comments. And one of the things I've noticed is guys talking about how they wish they could be a part of the militia. And I hear a lot of conversations that are kind of talking across each other. And it occurred to me that there's three different concepts of what the militia is. And I think all three are valid. And I think a lot of the confusion comes in when we don't recognize that there's three parts to the militia. All three function together, but also separately. There may be some of you may recognize some spiritual truths in there that apply to other things. But when we forget about this, none of the three concepts of the militia are whole without the other two. So there's the three types of militia are the general militia, the organized militia, and the constitutional militia. I might be out on a limb here a little bit by myself. I'm off the edges of the map. Here there be dragons. This is me talking. Some of you may disagree with me. My definition to those three things are the general militia is each individual able-bodied man. If you're an able-bodied man, you are the general militia, either by yourself or corporate or whatsoever. You are the general militia. You have a responsibility for the safety, security, and prosperity of yours and those around you, your sphere of influence. You can't abrogate that. You can't abdicate that. You can't outsource that. You will stand before God one day and have to answer for that responsibility he gave you. That's the general militia. There's the organized militia, where a bunch of men get together and consciously and deliberately cooperate with each other to be able to accomplish those goals. There's a few examples of this. The best one I've seen lately, and this is just my limited experience, the Pennsylvania State Militia seems to really have this thing going on. They seem to be the best organized militia that I'm aware of out there. I'm not a member of an organized militia. Like many of you, I would love to be. But a great example of this is, like I said, Pennsylvania State Militia, as far as I can tell. There's the 3 percenters. I think they fall into this category. The Oath Keepers, I think, fall into this category. There used to be a group in Michigan and Ohio, and there's one a little bit farther down south of Atlanta that I'm aware of. But that's the organized militia. This is a group of men who on their own get together and say, we are the general militia. We are going to function in that together. Then there's the constitutional militia. We've got one of our moderators, David Burden, is an expert on this. He is steeped in it, and he can quote it to you chapter and verse. And there's a lot of people who really are big on the constitutional militia. I'm gonna do a whole video on the constitutional militia soon. I'm actually going to talk to Burden, and I love calling him Burden. I think that's a great name for a man. I'm going to get him to help me really lock this topic down. But on just a quick surface overview of the constitutional militia, is that our Constitution actually sets up a system whereby the militia can function. And it has the sheriff in each individual counties or parishes being the head of the militia, and they set up our Constitution, and our whole system of government really was set up on making the militia function better. That's our whole system of government, as far as I can tell. The idea was making the militia more effective, or helping the militia become effective. My problem with now there's problems and advantages to all three of these, and actually, like I said, they all exist together. But there's a seniority, there's a hierarchy, and this is where I get off the edges of the map. I say the general militia is the senior militia. The organized militia is really necessary for the general militia. Okay, so I'm sorry, we had a technical difficulty. We had to stop filming for probably 30-45 minutes. So there's a change in the lighting, and there's a slight break in the train of thought. Bear with me while I pick it back up. So the general militia is the senior institution in my mind. There is nothing that takes precedence over that idea of each individual man being responsible for his family, his sphere of influence, the peace, prosperity, and liberty of his. You can't abrogate that. You can't give it up. The organized militia is men coming together to help the individuals attain that, and the constitutional militia is our country's acknowledgement of those two truths. and taking that organized militia to the next level, and making it a major power, and setting up a whole system of government around that concept of the militia. Believe this with all my heart and soul. That was our founders' intention, was to take the militia concept and turn it into a system of government, and it worked, and it was great. Okay, so here's where I think we run into traffic on this issue. You know, the constitutional militia guys, and this is my problem with the constitutional militia. Not my problem with the constitutional militia. I'm sorry, let me re-say that. This, I think, is the big danger with the constitutional militia. When you start, it gets real easy to say, oh, the Constitution sets up the militia. It gets real easy then to make the logical fallacy and say the Constitution establishes and regulates the militia. And I have a problem with that. Because the Constitution was established by the militia, not the other way around. And anytime when you say the Constitution governs the militia, well, suddenly the other institutions that the Constitution sets up end up governing the militia. All right? Peace and freedom and liberty are unnatural things, and as people we tend to try to put ourselves in bondage to the nearest, credible authority source, and so it becomes very easy for people to then say, oh yes, the Constitution establishes the militia, and the Constitution established the Congress, so the Congress controls the militia. It's a logical fallacy. It sounds stupid when you say it, but that's what ends up happening. And then you have liberals out there saying, oh well, the militia is the National Guard now, and that's how you get there. I love the idea of a constitutional militia, or I would rather say a militial constitution. I don't know if that works, but I think the last 150 years have proven to us that while the Constitution as written was a brilliant document, one of the greatest documents in the history of man, it's still a man-made document, and men can misuse it and pervert it, and that's why I always will. I wouldn't have said this even maybe 2 years ago, but now I would always say the Constitution is not the highest power in the land. The militia is the highest power in the land. The militia established the Constitution. If some militia rose up, they could do away with the Constitution, or they could reestablish and strengthen the Constitution. I know we're talking about realities, maybe it's more so than grand ideas at this moment, but I think even on the grand philosophical 30,000-foot level, if you stop and think about it dispassionately, I think you'll see I'm right. The Constitution's a beautiful, wonderful document, but we have to make sure we keep it in its proper sphere. Because if you make it more than it is, suddenly it starts falling down on us, as we've seen. The Constitution hasn't failed us. The Constitution has been failed, but in the process, it's the same thing. There's a failure. If you're watching this channel at all, you believe there is a failure in the system, and the system that supposedly the Constitution established. So for me, the constitutional militia scares me because of where we're at right now, how people have used the Constitution to dismantle and suppress the militia. I know that's not what you constitutional militia guys say. I think when the system was in balance and functioning properly, it was beautiful and it worked great. That's not where we're at. So when I see you guys, some of the comments, I see guys, organized militia guys maybe talking across constitutional militia guys who are kind of talking across the organized militia guys. You've got to start with the general militia, the highest authority in any man's life. I hate saying this because as a Christ follower, the highest authority in my life is God. But temporal authority, the highest temporal authority in any man's life is that man. There's no one else you can bow your knee to. No king but King Jesus, right? So for me, it has to start with the general militia, and once you establish that truth, that reality, that you are responsible for, and not even responsible, but required. You only have two. I've got a video on this, and it's one of our least watched videos, and it looks like I'm on cocaine in the video. I had a cold, and my eyes were all reddery, and I was bleary. But it's one of the foundational ideas for me is the theory of revolution. There's only two inalienable rights. You only have two things that can't be taken away from you, men. The right to decide what's right and wrong, and the right to resist the wrong. Those are the only two things that cannot be taken away from you. Even if they chain you to a wall, the very fact of being chained to the wall is your existence. That becomes resistance. If you weren't resisting, they wouldn't have to chain you. But those are the only two things that cannot be taken away from you. Everything else, your life, your property, your family, your dignity, everything else can be taken away from you. So it's obviously not inalienable. That's what inalienable means. It means it cannot be separated from you. The only things that cannot be separated from you are the right to choose what's right and wrong, and the right to resist the wrong. I'm getting a little off field here. Everything else is a freedom, a liberty, sometimes an indulgence that you're allowed. You can either use your inalienable rights to seize those liberties and secure them, or you can lose them by not exercising your rights. And those two inalienable rights is what makes you the militia. There's no one who can come and tell you, hey, that's wrong. At least no one who you can then turn around and say, well, this guy told me it was wrong, so it was actually right, but I did wrong off of his authority. There's no one who can relieve you of your responsibilities. That's the general militia. So when I talk about the militia, and maybe when like Burden talks about the militia, or sometimes Pennsylvania State Militia will comment on some of our ideas, there's three different things being talked about here. They're not antithetical to each other. They're not what's the word I'm looking for? There's some word and things can't coexist together. They're actually dependent on each other. A constitutional militia is based on the idea of an organized militia, which is based on the idea of a general militia. But you got to start with that general militia. Then you move to the organized militia. Then you can have a constitutional militia. You can't do it the other way around. You can't say, well, let's get the constitutional militia, because the constitutional militia is based on the other two. So there you go. I think we talk cross purposes a lot of times. I think there's some confusion when the three different groups are talking to each other, and it's not three different groups. If you're a constitutional militia, you are predicated on the existence of an organized militia. And if you are the organized militia, you are predicated on the existence of the general militia. And if you believe you're in the general militia, then you accept the responsibility that you have to decide what is right and wrong and resist the wrong on some level. And we need to come back to that it's a unified theory. How about that? We have a unified theory. I have founded the science of militia. We have a unified theory of everything. That might be more grandiosity on my part, but there you go, men. We appreciate you. We're gonna do videos on each of these three. I think we're gonna go back and do one on the general militia, the constitutional militia, and the organized militia. Although I am not qualified to do the organized militia, I may ask for. I haven't run this by them yet. We're not really close. They comment some. I may ask Pennsylvania State Militia to do a guest episode or point us to one of their videos that we can pull a lot of content from and use. So this is an official request to them if they watch this. If not, I will approach them, or if they point me to a better source, because they have an organized militia and they seem to be doing it very well. And obviously, at this point, I'm just a member of the general militia, and then we'll get Burden to help us out a lot with the constitutional militia. These will be three separate videos, and maybe we can make a little bit more headway in this thing, man. Thank you.